Welcome to yet another interview from our interview series at the Unsettled Europe, Refugees, State and Politics in Southeastern Europe conference. It's a pleasure to welcome Ulf Brunnbauer with us, who gave the keynote lecture yesterday. Ulf Brunnbauer is a professor at the University of Regensburg, and his alma mater is the University of Graz, so welcome back again to Graz. Yesterday you gave a historiographic overview of migrational flows from Southeastern Europe to Southeastern Europe, within Southeastern Europe, in the context of the region's globalizing nature, ever since the late 19th century onwards. So I'll ask you to, if possible, sum up the main points of your presentation from yesterday.
Right. I guess my most important point would be, this is something that I wanted to highlight yesterday, but which is also one of the sort of central narratives in the book that I wrote about immigration from Southeastern Europe, is that if we talk about Southeastern Europe as a region, we really have to consider migration in very different forms as one of the constitutive processes that shaped Southeast European societies, not only for the last 200 years. So basically we are talking about a region which has a very long tradition of high level of mobility within certain polities, but also across boundaries. And obviously nowadays we consider Southeastern Europe mainly as a region that is sending people to other places, mainly Western Europe, North America. And also this is not a new process. This is also something that I wanted to highlight, that there's continuity in immigration. Actually also very similar patterns, sometimes also very similar destinations, because you have these network effects which then really can be transferred from generation to generation. Networks are immensely important for explaining migration, because they reduce the costs of migration mainly. And if we focus on migration, I think we arrive at the new understanding of Southeastern European history for several reasons. First of all, it shows that the region has been integrated into a global circuit of labor, of people, for at least the last 2 centuries. That also means that if you want to understand specific developments, social, economic, but also cultural and political developments in Southeastern Europe, you always have to be aware of these transnational entanglements. And these are not abstract entanglements, but they are carried out, they are maintained by real people, which have their real concerns, their real agendas, and that interact in very complicated ways. But that also means that very many processes in the region are actually shaped or even determined by things that are going on somewhere completely else, like in America or in Western Europe. And I think this is really very important to keep in mind. And then, of course, we could contemplate what does this mean for the place of Southeastern Europe in a more global sense in the world. One could. I think one could make the argument, and this I think also drives the concerns in the region, that immigration, while it helped people to improve their lives, it also was a factor in the perpetuation of the semi-peripheral nature of Southeastern Europe. So it did not actually stimulate a long-term economic development or a catch-up process, but it rather retained Southeastern Europe in a situation of dependency in economic terms, but also in political terms. And then a second point that I think is important, because when you do migration studies, you're always tempted, even as a historian, you're always tempted to learn some lessons. This is also sort of the expectation of the audience. So that what can we learn from what you studied for the current situation? And one should be a little bit hesitant, especially as a historian, to draw neat analogies or these lessons from history. But there are some things that we can learn. First of all, we should decrease the hysteria that is used when migration is articulated, when migration is debated. Historically speaking, in terms of the number of migrants, obviously 2015 was really a phenomenon, unprecedented also in terms of numbers, but people going through Southeastern Europe, and I think this is really something very transient, so this will not be a permanent feature of Southeastern Europe. But otherwise, there were times when much more people were moving, and it also seems that and the debates at these peak moments of migration are always very similar. So publics being very concerned about immigrants who are perceived as culturally aliens. On the other hand, also publics in immigration countries being concerned of the best and brightest people leaving. So you have very similar debates, but you also see that in the long run, societies prove to be pretty resilient when it comes to the integration of migrants, and that in the long run, societies benefit from migration, especially from immigration. From immigration, here, at least the economists kind of disagree whether it's beneficial or not. I think this is something where the history of migration can help a little bit to put it into perspective. There's really this narrative, which is also driven by social scientists. Social scientists always believe that they are talking about something that is completely new. But if you put it in a more historical perspective, then you see long-term developments. You also see that there's a limit to what governments can do, but that there's also no reason for paranoia.
Something that you just touched upon and that I found particularly interesting yesterday is the transformation of the biggest fears of the nation state from it being emigration to it being immigration, particularly in the context of the East European demographic crisis that has hit most of East Europe since the last 20 years and even further than that. So could you just elaborate a little bit on this transformation?
Let me start with a small historical example, because it is not so much a transformation, because sometimes public figures already in the past drew a connection between fears related to immigration and those related to immigration. Stjepan Radic, whom we all know, when he was a deputy in the Sabor in Croatia, then still under Habsburg rule, he complained that the government of Croatia, of the Kingdom of Croatia, was not doing enough against immigration. Hundreds of thousands of Croats and Serbs from the Kingdom of Croatia leaving to America, but at the same time, this was his claim, Hungarian and German colonists would come to Croatia, so that the demographic balance would change in disadvantage of the Slavic population. I think this is what drives the sometimes really hysteria that is articulated when it comes to migration in the region. We are talking about relatively small countries, relatively weak countries in the political sense, also in the economic sense, with a very deep feeling, which is not always made public, but I think it is very, very much inscribed in this polities, a deep feeling of insecurity about their place in the world, and a sentiment or a sort of a feeling that they are not really considered equal by the dominant European nations. And the demographic development is a very important part of the story. Southeastern Europe has a net emigration loss of a couple of millions of people for the last years only, and if we take a longer perspective, then this has been a region that typically was left by more people than entered. Which is seen as a problem by nation builders, and it is objectively nowadays a problem, because it really puts a lot of stress on the welfare state. And on the other hand, those people who enter, which are not many, they are perceived as alien, as cultural alien, not being able to be assimilated. So there's a deep-rooted fear about the quality, the property of the nation, which is diluted by immigration, but also diluted by immigration, because the best members of the nation leave.
Okay. And just sort of to round up and to play devil's advocate a little bit, I mean, you said that one has to be hesitant as a historian, but and the question came up yesterday, so are we looking at a new phenomena of is there anything structurally significantly different to the migrational flows of the last few years that have no similarities in recent or even further history?
I'm not so sure. I mean, it obviously depends on what is your sort of a level of analysis and what would you consider still similar or already different. Structurally, as the process of immigration, of migration is concerned, I would rather stress the similarities, but I think what is really different now to compared to a couple of years ago, although one could also pinpoint historical analogies, is the way how it is publicly perceived. And I think, and this is really very important, even though the process is pretty much the same, but the public concerns are very different or very stronger. I think I mentioned it yesterday that since last year, immigration is the top priority concern of Europeans on average, according to the Eurobarometer. Although the numbers of migration today are not dramatically different from 30 years ago, but the public perception is a different one, and this obviously leads to a tectonic shift in the political landscape, because it gives rise to those political forces who thematize mainly migration, which is typically right-wing forces, and this is where the political danger actually comes from, not so much from the process per se, but from its perception by the public. And then one could, of course, ask, why is it so? Maybe it's sort of the last fight of the white man in the West at the time when, at least implicitly, most Western societies obviously have recognized the fact that on the long run they are losing importance and significance, and we see it obviously for a couple of years, the tectonic shift in global power relations, and the West will lose much of its importance. And I think migration is one of the fears where you can articulate it, and where at least people believe that something can be done. A lot can be done, but it will definitely harm the development of our societies.
Well,
self-inflicted damage.
On that happy note, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to talk to us, and I wish you an enjoyable rest of the conference, and hope to welcome you in Graz soon again.
Sure, it was my pleasure. Thank you.